Welcome to 100 Yards of Football this morning here on the network, the football site that's going to change the world in 2021. I'm your host, Vincent Turner. If you like the video today, please come in and share it. In today's video, I'm going to highlight the 1971 Alabama football team. That team changed the history of Alabama football, as I'm going to explain here in the next 15 to 20 minutes. So, if you like the video today, please come in and share it. I'm Vincent Turner of 100 Yards of Football. Well, 1971 was a very critical time for the University of Alabama when you look at the standpoint of them being deprogrammed in the 60s. And they had a coach that some people are saying was the greatest coach in college football. He was on the fence. And when you look what Coach Bryant did in the 60s, he changed the whole culture of Alabama football. They won 3 national championships, 1961, 1964, and 1965. Look at all the great players he had during that time in the 60s. Pat Trammell, the great Leroy Jordan of the Dallas Cowboys, my man Kenny the Snake Stabler that won the Super Bowl ring with the Oakland Raiders, and my man, the Chinchilla man, Mr. Joe Namath. But something happened during the 60s, especially after that 66 team that a lot of people in Alabama felt like got cheated out of the ring with the great, as I just mentioned, Kenny Stabler and Mr. Ray Perkins. But going into 1967 and 1968, Alabama only won 8 games. And a lot of people saying, hey, it's the power structure starting to fall at the University of Alabama. But then in 1969, Alabama went 6-5. Then in 1970, they went 6-5-1. And everybody in the state of Alabama started saying, is the wheels falling off? It's Paul Bear Bryant. Is he losing a little bit? Then in 1969, there were some things that surrounded the Alabama program. Number one, the African American Student Association filed a lawsuit against the University of Alabama and Coach Bryant because they said they weren't recruiting black athletes. Then there was rumors in the summer of 1969 that Bear Bryant had verbally accepted a head coaching job in the National Football League with the Miami Dolphins, a 5-year deal worth $1.7 million. Everything was starting to come around and crumble in 69 with the program. Then in 1970, another crucial time, Bear Bryant came to the forefront and said, hey, he's going to stay at the University of Alabama. The people throughout the state were so static, but there still was a lawsuit hanging over the University of Alabama and the athletic department because people saying you weren't recruiting a black athlete. Well, let's go into 1970, the first game of the year, against a mighty team out of the West Coast, the USC Trojans. And you know what happened that night. Sam the Bam Cunningham, Jimmy Jones, Clarence Davis ran all over the University of Alabama, and Alabama lost their game 42-21. And then for the rest of the year, Alabama lost very critical games. I remember a game they lost to the University of Tennessee that year. They had the great Jackie Walker at linebacker. But to make a long story short, Alabama ended up 6-5-1. And they ended up tying the Blue Bunny Bowl against the University of Oklahoma. They had Greg Pruitt. They had Joe Riley. They had Jack Mildred. But it was a thing about the University of Oklahoma that the great man from Arkansas, Mr. Bryant, took notice to, is that they ran an offense called the wishbone. And just previously in 1969, kudos to the eyes of Texas. The Texas Longhorns had won a national championship running the wishbone with James Street, Jim Burleson, Ted Coy, Steve Wooster. So going into 1971, critical time from the University of Alabama. The people are saying the game is past the Bear. So the Bear had to make some changes. The first major change he made in 1970, based on the lawsuit, he started recruiting black athletes. The first athlete he signed was Wilbur Jackson out of Ozark, Alabama, that's going to be eligible in 1971. And then a guy who I think changed the whole face on this football team in 1971, he was out of Mobile, Alabama. Went to Eastern Arizona Junior College, was the #1 junior college recruit in the country, John Mitchell. And when Bear Bryant signed him to be part of the defense, Alabama had a special player. But there was one other thing that happened going into the 1971 season. Bear Bryant had been a pro-style offense that he ran at Alabama since the time he stepped in Tuscaloosa in 1958. But he was going to make a major change. In the summer of 1971, he sent his two top assistants, Mal Moore and Jimmy Sharp, to Austin, Texas, to go meet Darrell Royals, who was the head coach at Texas, and my man Emory Ballard, who was the orchestrator, the founder, and the inventor of the wishbone. So, going into 1971, Bear Bryant made a conscious effort to change the offense, and he went to the wishbone. And it really opened up things for Alabama because they had a big-time running back. His name was the Italian Stallion, Mr. Johnny Musso. And the offense fit him perfectly. So going into 1971, the season critical for Alabama. Could they get back on top? The first game of the year. They're playing the mighty USC Trojans that had came down to Birmingham in 1970 and put everyone on notice that, hey, they could play football out there in the Pac-8. And Alabama was going to open up on a Friday night, 1971 against USC, the number 2 team in the country. And it was a measuring stick. And Alabama went up there and shocked the world. Let me say it. Shocked the world like Muhammad Ali said in 1964 when he beat Cassius Clay. We're shocked the world because Alabama was a 12-point underdog. And that evening, they had a great defensive performance from the defense. Robin Parkhouse, Mr. John Mitchell, Mr. Jeff Beard, Mr. Chuck Strickland, Mr. Tom Surlis played at a high level and held USC to 10 points. But there was the talk of that game Friday evening in 1971 on a hot night in Memorial Coliseum in LA. The offense, the wishbone, put up 320 yards rushing that evening. And Alabama became noticed. Second game of the year against Southern Mississippi, 42-6. The wishbone is running. They beat a fine University of Southern Mississippi team that had the best punter in the game, and Mr. Ray Guy. The third game of the year, they went up and played the Florida Gators. Oh, Florida had a new coach in Doug Dickey. They had the receiving core, John Reeves, Carlos Alvarez, and they had a backup quarterback by the name of Shane Gailey. We broadcasting live here today from Metro Atlanta. I think everybody know about Shane Gailey. He used to coach Georgia Tech. Well, you know what? That Alabama team went in there and shocked the world. First SEC game of the year, 38-0. Came away with 5 turnovers. The next week, Ole Miss played a very fine quarterback in Kenny Lyons, rolled through them 40-6. Then this Alabama team, everybody's saying, oh my God, the tide is rolling. Then it went down to Vandy, Nashville, Tennessee. Shout outs to my sister, the lovely Miss Rhonda Turner. That's where she's living at this present time in the beautiful city of Nashville. They beat a Vanderbilt team 42-0. A Vanderbilt team that had a pretty good quarterback in Steve Berger. But this is a game that I think changed the whole season. When we know the University of Alabama was going to be special. Tennessee, the Nemesis, had beat them on royally the last 2 years, playing them in Birmingham on that very hot AstroTurf. And you know what? The 6th game of the year, Alabama rolled 32-14, and it was the defensive performance. They held the great running back Kurt Watson, All-American, to 24 yards on 15 carries. Then they came back home the following week. To me, played the most talented team in Game 7. The Houston Cougars that proposed a very serious problem offensively. They had one of the best running backs in the country in Robert Newhouse. You should know him, played with the Dallas Cowboys. He had 182 yards on that evening. But Alabama still prevailed 34-20. Then they played the following week. They played a Mississippi State team in Game 8, beat them 41-10 on a Saturday night. Held Mississippi State under 157 yards total offense. The game that lets you know that Alabama is going to be a serious challenge for the national championship. National television on a November night, going down to Baton Rouge. At that time, Tiger Stadium seated about 70,000, and it gets loud in there. And if anybody's been to a game in Baton Rouge to see LSU play on a Saturday night, you know one thing is going to happen. You're going to smell a lot of liquor in the stands. And they're going to have Mike, I can't think it is the mascot, but I believe Mike 5. He's going to be a big Bengal tiger that weighs almost 700 pounds. And he's going to be in the gate right near the visitors' locker room. But Alabama went in there that evening and they put on a defensive show. Hats off again to John Mitchell, Robin Parkhouse, Jeff Beards, Tom Surlis, Chuck Strickland, Steve Williams, Lanny Norris. That Alabama defense that evening, 8 sacks and 4 turnovers. And Alabama prevailed 14-7. But there was a key point that happened in that game. Johnny Musso, the All-American tailback, got hurt that game. So following in game 10, he had to sit out against Miami. It was homecoming for Alabama, and they won that football game easily 31-3. The tidbit about that game, that win right there, Alabama beat a very good Miami team. They had a very good young coach in Fran Kersey, but he had a big-time player at the tailback position by the name of Chuck Foreman. We all should know about him, played with the Minnesota Vikings. Then game 11, for all the marbles, Alabama had already accepted an invitation to play in the Orange Bowl against Nebraska. And Auburn, who came in ranked number 2 in the country, had accepted the invitation to play in the Sugar Bowl against Oklahoma. This was really an elimination game. The Auburn team had beaten Alabama the last 2 years. They had a very star player. He's in heaven right now, but he was a fine football player in the SEC by the name of Pat Sullivan. Won the Heisman Trophy in 1971. They had Terry Beasley, who at that time might have been the best wide receiver in the country. Plus, Auburn led the SEC in total offense that year, 393 yards a game. And they had a big win the following 2 weeks prior when they beat Georgia in Athens. And Mr. Pat Sullivan put on the show. I believe he had close to 287 yards and 3 touchdowns. But that game right there was a game for all marbles. Johnny Musso came back healthy, and Alabama prevailed. Again, a great defensive performance. They held Auburn to 7 points. But the key point from that football game, when you talk about smash mouth football, you talking about dominating the line of scrimmage. You talking about Alabama with some big red elephants at the time, led by the All-American who went on and had a great career in John Hanna. Alabama dominated Auburn. They held the ball 41 minutes. Auburn only had it 19 minutes offensively. But the guy that put on the show, and to me, might have should have won the Heisman Trophy that year, Johnny Musso came back with a bad toe. 33 carries, 167 yards. And a lot of those carries and yards were what I call big man football. 5, 6, 7 yard pops. He put on the show, and you know what? Alabama prevailed 31-7. And everybody in the world saying, Alabama is back. Roll Tide. Then Alabama ended the year. It didn't end no good, no, because they played the best team in the country, Nebraska. Nebraska led by Jerry Taggy, the great Johnny Rodgers. They were just too much for Alabama in the Orange Bowl. But there was one thing to take away from that football game. Alabama had 4 turnovers in that game. They led the points for Nebraska. If Alabama doesn't turn the ball over, we might be talking about this team winning the national championship. But I'm going to tell you what I took from this 1971 football team at Alabama that, to me, really saved the program. Number one, it had great senior leadership. Johnny Musso and Robert Parkhouse were tremendous leaders. Number 2, you got to give credit to Paul Bear Bryant going into 1971. He decided, you know what? Everybody's doubting me. The whole state is doubting me. Then we have this unrest with the civil rights movement that was going on heavy in the 60s. But he decided to change the offense, go to the wishbone, and he decided to bring in 2 very talented African-American players, and Wilbur Marshall out of Ozark, Alabama, and Mr. John Mitchell out of Mobile. And that's what turned this team around. And the one thing, if you look how it was so impactful, in the 70s, the University of Alabama came the winningest program in the 70s in college football. They won 3 national championships in 1973, 1978, and 1979. And after this 71 team, look at all the great players that came through the windows and the doors at the University of Alabama. Dwight Stevenson, Richard Todd, Marty Lyons, Barry Krause, Don McNeil, E.J. Jr., Stedman Shealy, This 71 team changed the whole culture. And to me, it saved the University of Alabama's football program. So I'm going to end it with this. When you talk about Alabama, right now, you got to talk about the program that's at the top of college football in 2021, led by the young man out of West Virginia, Mr. Nick Saban. And it's no question he has it going on. But I want everybody to remember this. However, it was the guy out of Arkansas that made Alabama, that set the tone for the University of Alabama. And that's why they said he walked on water back in the 60s and the 70s. His name is Paul Bear Bryant. The end of the day, for the 1971 University of Alabama football team, we had a group, a singing group that had a top 4 single in the top 100. And the name of the group was Three Dog Night. And they had a song, Joy to the World. Jeremiah is a bullfrog, and he's all mine. Joy to the world, joy to the all time. Alabama, Paul Bear Bryant, he restored the culture of the 1971 Alabama football team. And as y'all see that beautiful man coming on the screen right now, my man, the producer, the guy behind the scenes, the guy that makes it happen, Mr. Jeremiah Long.
Yes, sir.
And, you know, at that time, it was very critical for the University of Alabama. Mm-hmm. And Paul Bear Bryant made 2 major changes, recruiting the African-American player and changing the offense. Mr. Long, do you have anything to say about that 71 team and Paul Bear Bryant?
Hey, I'm just glad that he made the changes and the movements that he did, because it went from being behind the times to being ahead of the times real quick.
So I'd like to say thank y'all. Thank you to the staff here at 100 Yards Football. Thank you to this young man, that handsome young man from Oak Ridge, Tennessee, by way of the Big Orange, Mr. Jeremiah Long. My final words to the University of Alabama, and y'all do have a great program, and y'all are the #1 football program in the country. It's this right here. Roll Tide. Y'all be blessed today here on 100 Yards of Football, and have a wonderful, wonderful week.